Hello everyone and welcome back to Sullivan County 4-H Learn by Doing Outdoor Skills Series. And we're back at 4-H Camp Shankitunk. We're actually in we are at 4-H Camp Shankitunk today, and we're actually in the rec hall because of that. It just poured here. It just rained a lot for like the third day in a row, and it's still a little grumbly. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that you can do in case you're in a survival situation where you weren't expecting to have to make a fire, but you do, and you don't have a fire starter with you, or you're looking for an alternative for a fire starter other than kindling. They do make little fire starter packets, of course, that you can buy, and they're very easy to light with a match, and they light right up. I'm not a fan of those personally, just because of sometimes they have a lot of chemicals in them. It depends on the brand that you buy, so of course you can look for that. A fire is really key if you need it, if you're in a sudden survival situation. It can boil your water for you so that you know you have safe water to drink. Of course, it cooks your food, it provides warmth and light, and it's really important for morale. So if you're in a situation where you unexpectedly have to start a fire, but like what you can see right now, everything is soaked and you don't have an alternative fire starter, what do you do? So that is what I'm showing you today. Some easy things that you can do that are found very commonly in nature that can help you start a fire. And one of the ones that I'm going to talk about, I already kind of constructed a little thing for, is pine resin. And pine resin is a reaction that pine trees have when they get any kind of injury to the outside of their bark. So if a limb falls in a windstorm, if a bird comes along like a woodpecker and pecks a little too deep into it, if bugs start chewing on it, or if a branch just naturally breaks off that didn't already contain dead tissue, a pine tree responds in a way where it releases something called resin, and it's this super, super sticky sap that comes out of the tree that acts as a scab for the tree, and it helps to fight off, will not grow fungus there, so it helps to keep the rest of the tree healthy by stopping any bacterial infection or fungus from being able to get into the tree through that injury. So it happens naturally, and it's very easy to collect. You do not have to go and slice up a bunch of pine trees to get resin from them. You can collect from pine trees just in their natural life cycle, having resin pretty much available on most any pine tree that you can find. You just have to know how to look for it. There are some people that believe that cutting into the pine tree enough so that the resin comes out won't hurt the tree, and while that is for the most part true, I don't like to do that. Again, we talked about it before in some of our videos. I don't like to be impactful when I am in a situation, especially if I don't have to be. If I do not have to injure the tree, I'm not going to. So I'm going to show you real quick where I collected this little bundle of resin from, and then I'll also show you a close-up of what I made here as a fire starter. So let's go take a look at that before it rains again. Okay, so do you see that kind of beige white line right there on the tree? And if you look up the tree, you can see multiple spots that have that. That is the resin. So you can see this is kind of an old injury. All of this dried cakey stuff is dried resin there. So you can pretty easily, with a knife or probably even a sharp stick, just kind of flick that scab off, and you can collect it that way. The fresher it is, the stickier it is. So I'll show you a more fresh one here. Okay, right there, you can see the kind of almost shiny looking drops right there. That is super fresh resin, really, really sticky, probably originating from that point right there. And again, this is just a natural reaction that the tree has to injuries. That right there is another example of it. You can see that hole is much more dramatic, a lot bigger on that tree, but the tree is still fine. It's really healthy, it's growing, no problem. That is the point of the resin, is to keep the tree healthy and growing. That probably lost its branch in a windstorm just because of how dramatic the hole is. But that is, you can see the fresher, more fresh resin kind of hanging down there. That is pine resin. Okay, so this right here is my little resin bundle that I made. So I added to it just to make it a little easier to handle and to consolidate it. This right here, all this clear kind of shiny stuff is the resin. Then I added some pine needles and also some little seeds off of the pine cones to make it a little easier to handle. It's still super sticky anyway. So that is pine resin. So this is like a little natural fire starter now. And now I'm going to show you another technique called feathering that you can do with wet wood to get it to have dry surface. Okay, just first a little bit of knife safety. We're going to talk about a knife zone and what that is and what it means. So imagine, hold in a safe way, my knife is still sheathed, your arm all the way out with a nice grip on your knife, and see where the tip of my knife sheath is, and then even add a couple more inches to that, and imagine extending your arm like this with a couple additional inches all the way around your body where you're standing, and that is called your knife zone. And no one or no thing should be in your knife zone, and that way if you slip while you're using your knife, you know that you're not in danger of accidentally hitting anyone or anything. So be sure to always do that and keep an eye on your knife zone and make sure everyone around you knows that you're using a knife so they don't accidentally go in it. And when you unsheath it, be very careful to make sure you have a good grip on the outside, and very carefully, oh, mine is strapped in there, double safe, very carefully pull it out like so. Now this is the spine of the blade, of the knife rather, and that edge is the part that's sharp. There's some serration on this one as well, and then this piece, the handle, sometimes also referred to as a tang, is the part that you hold on to, and this has a finger guard on it as well. Now this knife is wrapped in paracord. As you can see, it's a little dual purpose like we talked about before, so I can take that off and use it if I need to, and that's why this finger guard isn't any bigger, because it really doesn't have a manufactured handle on it. So again, this is the spine, that is the edge. You always keep the spine facing you, and that way the edge isn't anywhere towards you. So make sure your knife zone is good. And if you were going to, if you do have flint, a fairing rod like this one, the actual fire starter portion of this rod is a different color. You can see it kind of right there than the rest of this rod. So if I were to use this fairing rod, I'm going to switch my hands here. So I hold the fairing rod like this. You do want to use the spine of the blade to strike so that you don't damage or buff or dent or bend the actual blade part of your knife. So I'm going to use the spine of the knife and strike it like that. But you can see, even as I'm doing that, it's kind of at like a 45-degree angle. You can see, even as I'm doing that, I'm not pointing the knife towards myself, ever. The blade, if I were to slip while I was doing this, the blade would still not be towards my body. If I were to fall straight down, the blade would still be pointing away from my body, the sharp edge of the blade. So again, spine of the knife, 45-degree angle. This is kind of a small, narrow fairing rod, but you don't need much more than that. A nice, smooth strike. So again, make sure knife zone, make sure no one else is around. Always have the spine pointing towards you, even if you're using it as a fairing rod. And remember, especially when you're first using, or learning how to use rather, a camping knife or a knife of any kind, you do it with adult permission and adult supervision. You safely sheath it when you're not using it so that accidents don't happen, and definitely always have an adult around when you're first learning about how to correctly use a knife. Okay, so to feather, we're gonna need our camping knife, but remember to do this in a safe way. You can see that this piece of wood is really super soaked. So this is my knife. I'm gonna hold it with the spine away from me at an angle, and I'm going to start peeling layers of this off. And you can see the first couple layers are really wet, so they're kind of falling off. But as we go, we're just gonna start making little slices in it, little curls in it like that. Let me try to get a couple more down here. And this kind of increases the surface area of the dry wood, because eventually you'll find dry wood in there. So it increases the surface area, and it makes it so that this is a lot easier to catch fire than this whole wet thing. So you would just kind of do this as long as you would need. You do have to kind of get used to the technique so you don't accidentally cut your feathering off if you slip. So just making curls like this all along the bark. You can just go ahead and take the bark right off of it if it's in your way, if it's super wet. So like right there, I slipped a little too much and I cut all the feathers away. So then we just kind of start over. And of course, if you do that, hold on to those feathers and just simply use them as wood shavings to help too. So you would just kind of go around the entire stick and just kind of feather it like such, and that'll expose the dry portions of the wood. And I did want to show you, this is the same stick, just the other end. So you can see, you know, the wet does go into it, but the core is typically dry. So that is what we're looking to feather, this area here. That's a little cross section for you. So now we're going to see if these actually work. Okay, so here we are in the main fire pit at camp, right in the middle of the fields, and we are going to see how these light. So this is our resin fire starter, and then this is our feathered stick. Now ideally you would keep feathering this stick to as many feathers as you could, and to the core be as small as you could get it, but just for the example I stopped where I did. So let's start with this fire starter first. Okay, there you go. You can see the resin is kind of like popping and bubbling. But there you have it. So, the resin one definitely works, and that is going to burn for a very long time. It is taking a while for that resin to, it really hasn't burned through hardly any of it. So that is going to take a long time to burn through. And of course, we have our water here open, so we can put that up like that. And when that cools off, I'll show you what it looks like after it's burned, but really not a whole lot of it burned. Actually, it was really just contained right there. So there you go. Resin fire starter is a success, and there's still a ton of fuel left in there. So you could even use this to start a fire, and then if you're really sneaky, remove it. Well, you just don't need to gather that much to start that fire with. So that was a success. Now let's try this feathering. Now again, ideally there would be more feathers to try this on, but let's see. So you can see how wet this wood is based on just how much it's smoking. It didn't necessarily ignite, it definitely lit. And if this was feathered thinner and deeper so that you had more ruffles underneath it to keep catching, and it wasn't so close to the surface, being so very damp like what I showed you the cross section of before, I bet you that this would light up like that. We can try it one more time right here where there's a little bit more closer together feathers. I just think that if this was feathered a little bit better, it would work. So there you go. You can see it like that, catching a little quicker. That is a better idea of how it should be burning. Hopefully you guys can see this. It got pretty bright out there now, out here now. So that's a little bit better caught. There you go. Now it's caught. So I think out of these two methods, I would definitely use both if I needed to, but I think that the resin one is a little bit more reliable. Okay, so we tried two different types of natural fire starter today. In case you're in a situation where you need to start a fire, and especially if you're in a wet location, or you're just having a hard time getting it started, we showed two different methods. The resin method, I think, is a lot more reliable, especially if you do not have a camping knife on you when you need to make your fire starter. That is a really good option if you're really scant on your equipment when you need to make your fire starter. It worked, it lit up just like that, and it was great. Kept everything very contained, and it was burning for a really long time. We didn't even burn through a quarter of our little tiny resin ball that we had there. So that was a really great one. The feather, we still might get rain. The feathering technique, I think, also will work really well. You just have to go deeper than I did with it, because I just made one quick as an example. But if you take your time and you go nice and slow with it so you don't lose any of those shavings, and you make it as to the core of the branch that you're working with as possible, I could see how that would be a really successful fire starter as well. I definitely like in the resin ball just having that little extra pine needles just to help move the flame in a direction, and keeping it towards the middle of the resin I think was a great little addition to it. So I hope that you've enjoyed today's video. I hope that it gets you thinking a little more creatively, especially if you're in a survival situation. You will be surprised how creative you can become. So I hope that I'll see you again next week. Thank you again, 4-H Camp Shankitunk and CCE Delaware County, for allowing us to use this 4-H camp today in filming our videos. And for more Cornell Cooperative Sullivan County videos and project ideas, be sure to check out the YouTube, the Instagram, and the Facebook page of Cornell Cooperative Extension Sullivan County, and follow the link in the description below on how to join Sullivan County 4-H. As always, be safe and have fun in nature. See you next time.